Through the Maimer ציון, במשפט תפדה, this is in Memorim Melukotim. Maimer look at the fourth chelik, and this is the 16th Maimer. And the Rebbe said this in Shabbos Parshas Devorim, Shabbos Chazon, which was Erev Tisha B'Av in the year Tafshin Mem Aleph, and then later on it was printed a few years later in Kuntras called Shabbos Chazon in Tafshin Mem Ches, and that was printed for the coming Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Dvorim Shabbos Chazon. Tisha B'Av was a nitche then, and it was published Hey Menachemov. It was a Shnas Hakel Shnas Tafshin Mem Ches. The Maimer of Tzim B'Mishpat Tipod. So we'll start do the Maimer. H'tשמא. Shabbos Parshas Dvorim, Shabbos Chazon, Erev Tisha B'Av, H'tשמא Mem. ציון b'mishpat tipode ושבי בצדקה. That's the last verse in the first page of Yeshayahu, which we read on Parshas Devarim before Tisha B'Av. So the pasuk says ציון will be redeemed. Pidia, the redemption will take place through Mishpat, through Torah, and the Shaveha will be coming out through tzedakah. And this is going to be the discussion: what exactly is ציון and what is the Shaveha? The various different interpretations that the Rebbe brings down. So, umedayik admur morasham nishmos eiden b'mamore dibra maschil zeh. So the Rebbe Rashab in the Maimer that opens up with this dibra maschil tzima mishpot the shnas aderes in the year Tofrej Ayin Dalad. So the Rebbe Rashab asks a question that Hare Hakavone b'Tzion kan hiloi al ir Tzion. The intention of the word Tzion over here is not the city of Tzion. Sometimes we say Ki mitzion teitzitzera udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. So over there Tzion means Yerushalayim, but here it's not the meaning of the word Tzion. B'mishpat tipoda Yerushalayim will be redeemed. Befrat specifically doesn't talk specifically about the city called Tzion, Ella al Klolus Yisrael. But here we're talking about the Yidden who are going to be Tipode. They are referred to as Tzion over here. So, V'lama Omer Tzion. So why does the Pasuk call them Tzion? Rebbe will explain why the Yidden in this pasuk are called Tzion versus V'shaveh. But the question the Rebbe Rashab asks, since it doesn't mean the city of Tzion, but it's talking about the Jewish people in general, so why does it say Tzion b'mishpat tipoda? Not, for example, because Yisrael b'mishpat tipoda. Why Tzion? And v'lo b'omer Tzion. V'gam b'dayik ma shekosov v'shoveho, that and they returnees would be b'tzedakah. So the Rebbe Rashab asks, Miheim Shoveho, who are those? And we'll see soon in the Maimer, Shoveho or captives or returnees. We'll see in the Maimer. But the Rebbe wants to explain now that the question that the Rebbe Rashab asks, Miheim Shoveho, who are these Shoveho that the Pasuk is talking about, is a follow-up question, since the Rebbe learns, like the interpretation that Tzion isn't speaking about Yerushalayim, and therefore it's talking about the Yidden. So if Yidden are Tzion, who are the Yidden who are Shaveha? And the Rebbe explains now in the brackets that had the interpretation of Tzion meant Yerushalayim, So then the pasuk is talking about ציון, the city of Yerushalayim, will be redeemed. Vishoveho is talking about the Yidden, the returnees, those who are coming back to Yerushalayim, B'tzedakah. That would be okay. He wouldn't have the question. But since the Rebbe says that Sion, the Rebbe Rashab says that Sion means the Yidden, so we're already talking about the Yidden. So who are the Yidden that are Sion? Who are the Yidden that are Vishaveh? That's why the question is, the Rebbe explains, Yesh Leimer. Shegam diuk ze mihem shoveho. Also, this question, who is the shoveho, who al pi masha'omer lifnei ze, is based on what he says beforehand. Shakavone betzion kan hi aklolus Yisrael. That the intention here, when it says Tzion, is talking about the Jewish people in general. The Yesh Mefarshim, because others explain Shetzion koyal ir Tzion. The Tzion, b'mishpat tefda means the city of Tzion, v'shoveh koyal Yisrael. And the returnees are the Yidden. So the pasuk is talking about the city and about the Yidden. But since Avol lahapirusha b'hamaimer, but according to the explanation of the Maimer, Tzion koyal Yisrael, that Tzion refers to the Yidden. So we're already talking about the Yidden. Mahim shnei hasugim the Tzion v'shivya. So the question is, what are the two categories of Tzion and Shovel? So that's the question: who is Tzion and who is Shovel? But also, what is it that we are saying that the Tzion is through Mishpat? V'gam mahu inya shepedia Tzion tia b'mishpat. That is through Mishpat. V'apedia shel Shovel is b'tzedakah, and that is b'tzedakah. So what is these two? What is Shovel, and why is there a difference that Tzion is Mishpat and Shovel is b'tzedakah? Unekudas habiur, and the point of the explanation in this Maimer, the Rebbe says the Rebbe's explanation on this is the Nekudas habir that the Rebbe is giving here is based on Pi Hamevur B'Rishimus Tzemach Tzedek al HaPosik, based on what is explained in the notes of the Tzemach Tzedek on this posik, and also b'Maimer Hanal and in the above Maimer of Tafresh Ayin Dal Aderes from the Rebbe Rashab. So the point is over there like this: the Tzion koyi al Yisrael ha'oiskim b'Torah mitzvos. Tzion references Yidden who are occupied in Torah and mitzvahs, and the reason v'nikroim b'shem Tzion, and they're called with the name Tzion, the learning Torah mitzvahs, they're called Tzion. Lefi shehem mutzuyonim b'Torah mitzvahs, because they are exceptional and distinguished by the learning of Torah mitzvahs. That's why they're called Tzion. Tzion represents the Yidden who are occupied in Torah mitzvahs. And the Rebbe brings a Yerushalmi in the pasuk where the Yidden are called Tzion, and you see that according to the way the Yerushalmi explains the pasuk, they're called Tzion, that it is when Yidden occupy in Torah mitzvahs, that's why they're called Tzion. Okay, the Isra Yerushalmi ala pasuk, as we find in Yerushalmi in the pasuk, the pasuk says, "I put my words in your mouth," which is Torah. Uvetzel yodi kisisicha, and the shadow of my hand I cover you, which is mitzvahs, which mitzvahs are garment. Lintoya shemayim v'lisoid oretz. That's the level of korbanos, because the korbanos plant the heavens and the earth. The chukis shemayim v'oretz is because of korbanos, as said elsewhere in Chazal. So then the pasuk says, "V'leimer l'tzion ami ata." Then I say to Tzion, you're my people. That ami is Tzion. So what does it say? So it says like this: Chazarnu al kol hamikra v'lo matzonu shenikra Yisrael Tzion elazeh. We reviewed the entire mikra, the entire chumash, the entire Tanakh, and we didn't find that the Yidden are called Tzion. This is the only place. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, "V'leimer l'tzion amiyato," to say to Tzion, "You're my people." So this is the only place that Yidden are called Tzion. So what does it mean that this is the only place they're called Tzion? So you do a habir bazeh. So the explanation that is known about this, that the pasuk zeh medaber begimel hadvarim shaleim ha'olam omed, because in this pasuk he discusses about the three matters on which the world stands: on Torah, V'edog, Milus, Chasod. V'asim dvarei b'ficha zu Torah. Put the words in your mouth. This is Torah. But tzel yoda yizkisicha zu gemilas chasodim. This is the act of kindness. Yod mitzvahs gemilas chasodim. And the Torah Shemayim v'lishoid oretz elu hakarbonis. And that's the Shemayim and oretz, this karbonis kedisha b'rishal mishom, as the Rishalmi says over there. So what's the meaning that the pasuk, when it talks about that this is when the Yidden are called Tzion, the only time is v'zeu lemotzonu shenikru Yisrael Tzion elazeh. The only time when the Yidden are called Tzion is this, means to say that when they are doing all these things, Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasodim, that's when they're Tzion. Kizeh sheYisrael nikroim shem Tzion hu. This that Yidden are called Tzion is al yidei she'oiskim v'Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasodim, through their occupation in Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasodim, she'en klolus kol ha-Torah mitzvahs, which is the generality of Torah mitzvahs. That makes them Tzion. So this is the explanation why Tzion is, who is the Tzion? The Tzion is those who occupy Torah mitzvahs, like we find the Pshat in the Rishalmi. That's when the Yidden are called Tzion. So when the pasuk says Tzion b'mishpat tefda, it's talking about the Yidden who are called Tzion, who are occupying in Oiskim b'Torah mitzvahs. Who is the Vishaveho? So here Vishaveho means that they're captured. They've been captured because they don't do Torah mitzvah, so they're captured by the other side and are not doing what they're supposed to. They are in actual captivity. In this case, Vishaveho Meloshin Shivya. This would be, and their captives, those who are captives from Shivya. Tzion, those who learn Torah, and Shaveho, those who've been caught, and those who are captives, will be through tzedakah. And their captives were Behaguf and Nefesh HaBahamis. Those are the Yidden who are in captivity in the Guf and the Nefesh HaBahamis, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not Eisik B'Torah Mitzvahs. So now we'll also understand why, according to these two categories, why Tzion is b'mishpat. That would mean, b'mishpat means by justice, by right. So they're freed by right because they deserve it, because they're Eisikim B'Torah Mitzvahs. But b'shavel will be charity, will be b'tzedakah. They don't deserve it, but yet the righteousness of Hashem they'll take them out as well. So this is the meaning of Tzion b'mishpat tipoda v'shavel b'tzedakah. That Tzion will be freed with mishpat, and the ones who are in captivity with tzedakah. Sha'abdiyah shelo iski b'Torah b'mishpat. The redemption of those who are occupied in Torah, that is by justice. Apishuras hadin. That's the measure of judgment. Correct. That's right. But as opposed to the redemption of those who are in captivity, that's tzedakah. That's a righteousness. So, okay. So therefore, that's now. The question is, everybody, why are we saying even those who are not occupied, they have to do tshuva before to be freed? From the Guf and Nefesh HaBahamis in the Shivya, they need to do tshuva. They're not going to be freed just to tzedakah without being. So why we call that tzedakah? The Hagam, So although Shagam, Pidiyosum She'elu Shehem B'Shivya B'Haguf V'Nefesh HaBahamis Tiyal De'atshuva, even though that also the redemption of those who are in captivity in the Guf and Nefesh HaBahamis is also going to be through tshuva. Dein Yisrael Negolin El B'Tshuva. The only way to be freed is tshuva. They're not going to go out just by tzedakah. V'vticha Torah, and the Torah promises, Seif Yisrael Lasis Tshuva B'Seif Gulosim, that at the end of Golus, the Torah promises the Yidden will do tshuva, and that way they will be immediately redeemed. So we need tshuva regardless. But that alone, the Rebbe will explain, is a tzedakah, because why could tshuva help? So that's called the tzedakah, but it is through tshuva. You need tshuva in order to be redeemed. The Rebbe now in the bracket is going to say that the word v'shoveho, those who are captive, mean they're not doing in the guf and nefesh habahamis, and the word v'shoveho is also the word of teshuva. That's the connection, because shoveho comes through tshuva. Everything comes through tshuva. But still, that's a tzedakah. That's called b'tzedakah. V'yesh loymar. So we can say, the zeu hakesher shel hapirush v'shoveho meloshin shivya, the connection of the meaning of shoveho that comes from the language of captivity. Im hapirush, the v'shoveho oisit tshuva, with the pirush those who do tshuva, those who in captivity, or v'shoveho those who do tshuva. V'shoveho meloshin tshuva, that means those who are returning, meaning doing tshuva, because it's the same thing. Kibediyas shivya meloshin shivya. Because how do you redeem the captive shivya that comes from shoveho shivya in captivity? Through tshuva. But still, even though they require, we call that tzedakah, not mishpat. Why? The fact that tshuva atones ain't al pi mishpat. That's not by justice. Elo chesed u'tzedakah d'Hakadosh Baruch Hu. But rather it's a kindness, it's a tzedakah, a charity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for tshuva and for tshuva to atone. So now it seems that redemption through justice by right is a higher level than shoveho, than bringing back and the redemption through tzedakah, that you give a charity. But the Rebbe says no. The Rebbe explains now that even though the ציון is by right, needs to be redeemed because they're tzaddik, they're doing right, yet the level of a shoveho through tshuva is even a higher level than the level of tzin bishvat tipod. Elo sha'afal pikei, notwithstanding that this is by right, and that's only a tzedakah, habdiya, the shivya, the redemption of captivity, hilamayla mahabdiya di tziyah. That's a higher level than the level of redemption of tziyah. Because the level of justice, by justice, is measured and limited. That's by right. But as opposed to charity, charity is beyond, higher, above any limitation. So therefore, a redemption that comes as a tzedakah is a higher form of redemption because it's not limited. Shemishpat hu ha'oir shebegeder hakelim, that mishpat is the light that comes down within the boundaries of the vessels. U'tzedakah hu ha'oir shebehavdol, and tzedakah is the light of havdol shebarak ba'ofen shel tzedakah. It comes only in the way of charity, which is an unlimited, not limited by the kelim. And therefore, so therefore, the oil that comes to the tzaddikim will come through mishpat, which is geder hakelim, hu oil shebegeder hakelim. That's the light which is by the kelim. That's what they bring down. So, and the Rebbe explains that, so it's a limited level of oir. Their redemption is limited to the oir, what they get to take them out. Their pedia is an oir b'geder hakelim. And the Rebbe explains what is the limitations there. V'hainu, the fact that they are being redeemed by right, by justice, there's two aspects to this. Number one, Aleph, she'ein zekukim l'tzedakah, they don't require charity. Kivon shemagil hemapidin, they deserve it. They deserve this by right, by justice, by the halacha. And number two, Beis, she'inyan hamishpat. So first they get it, but mishpat, when you talk about judgment, in essence is shoylel tzedakah. You say judgment, you get what you deserve, which means, but what you don't deserve, you don't get. There's no righteousness. There's no above the law. That's the law. Lo yisakiru ponim b'mishpat. The judge cannot show any favoritism during mishpat. Mishpat has to be what is right, by what they deserve. So, Opirush Rashi, and Rashi says, Rashi explains there that what does it mean not to show any favoritism? So if there is a judgment between a poor and a rich person, so the poor person deserves tzedakah, so maybe you're going to say you'll tilt the judgment to the poor person because he has to support him anyways, so let him support him by losing the case and giving him the money. No, you're not allowed to do that. Meaning, we don't favor, we don't give poor people, we don't just give. So that rejects the idea of tzedakah. Mishpat means fair. We're not going to give, we're going to do justice. We're not going to give outside of what's right to do tzedakah. So basically, this is when you do things b'mishpat. This is what the redemption is for the tzaddikim. But v'ha'oir shenimshach lebal tshuva shepitiyosam hi b'tzedakah hu ha'oir shebehavdalah. But the oir that comes to Baal Tshuva, the light that Baal Tshuva gets through his redemption, it's tzedakah. He gets a light, not a mishpat, not a judge, not a limited, finite, but which is distinguished, removed beyond. So, while this is fair, and this is tzedakah, but tzedakah is not limited. Gimel. So, v'hinei, Yesh oid pirush b'veshaveho. There's another meaning of shaveho. Right now we're teaching b'shaveho those who are captive by the guf and the nefesh bahamis. But there's another pirush shaveho, meaning those who return. The shaveho meloshin hashava, that it's the loshin of returning, which means hashava, those who are returning min hagoyla. Which means they were in exile and they're coming back home. They're coming home from exile. So returning something in a way shows that they weren't really elsewhere. They're just coming back from where they were. It shows there was only a distance. They were taken away from the place. According to this, Vishavel captivity means it's a lower level than just ציון, because they were actually in captivity over there. You could just be, but here Vishavel, just like Punkt Fakir, the opposite. Here Vishavel means they're returning back home from a place where they were away from home, but it's even less than being redeemed. Let's look inside. The Shaveh Hashove min hagoyla. The Loshen Hashove, when we say to returning, ubefrat kasher hu b'smichas latevis tipoda shalifniza. Especially when it follows next to the word of being freed before. So you're saying ציון b'mishpat tipoda needs to be redeemed. And then we say those who are returning. This points that even before the return, he's really not in Golus. So why does he have to return? Because he's elsewhere. He just finds himself in another place, in the place where he was exiled. You need to come back and return back to his place. So now, according to this, the Shaveh is a higher level because he was never really, not even have to be redeemed. He just has to come back from the space. So these returnees are on a higher level than those that you say of them, they'll be redeemed. To redeem something, that applies to someone who's in exile. You got to take him out from there. You got to free him from there. But if somebody who's just Shaveh, he's away, you don't have to free him. You have to bring him back. But as opposed to the Shaveh, who's only finds himself in exile, you don't have to free him. It's only one who is in Golus, then you need to redeem him from the Golus. That's where it applies the Lashon Pediya, Tzia, and B'mishpat Tipoda. Means that they were really in Golus. The Shaveh is just out of place, but he's not really in Golus. So, if we should apply the Svarav before, that the higher level of the level of Tzia b'mishpat, which is a lower, according to this pshat, is a further descent because they're mamash in Golus. They get redeemed in mishpat by right, and those who are v'shoveho, who never really in Golus, they need tzedakah. Why is that? Hey, how does it fit? How does it apply? The redeemed of those who are in exile, that's by right, that's justice. That's the measure of judgment. And the return from those who are just in the place of exile, which are on a higher madrega, they never were captured in Golus. They're not in Golus, but they're just in another place. B'tzedkah is by charity. Also, we need to understand, according to this interpretation, who are these two categories about which we say that tipoda and then those v'shaveh. Harei tipoda nemar b'negei l'tzion, but tipoda is said about Tzia shekoyi canal, which we said before, al Yisrael eskim b'Torah mitzvahs. So they are occupied in Torah mitzvahs, and yet we're saying they're in Golus. Here we're talking about a new category, Shaveh, who are not really in Golus. Even though they learn the Torah mitzvahs, and yet they're in Golus, and we still need to redeem them. What is the merit? What is the level of these who are called v'shoveh? They're not really in Golus. So who are they? Now we switched around. The v'shoveh is actually a greater level because they're never really in Golus. They're just out of place. So who are they? If the Tzia who occupied their mitzvahs. And the reason they're called Tzia, we said before, was because when they learn Torah mitzvah, they're distinguished, they're tziyun. So who are these shaveh who don't even go into Gos? And the Rebbe is going to explain that it actually talks about the neshama, the guf and the neshama. The neshama doesn't even go into Golus. He's going to explain that the neshama coming down into the guf, it's a descent, but the guf doesn't really take it over. The neshama remains, so it has to return back to its place, as opposed to the guf and the nefesh habam is the koiches hagluyim of. They come down into actually, you need redemption for them. You need pedia, the see in the mishpat tipodim. And the Rebbe is going to explain, like, the neshama and the guf is like oiris v'kelim. By the light, there is no exile, only by kelim. Dalet. V'yuvam b'hagdim hamevur b'hamaimer. We'll understand this by introducing what the Maimer says, the inyan golus v'shivya shaykh davke b'hakelim. That the whole idea of exile and captivity, that applies specifically to the kelim. When we talk about the oiros v'kelim, what comes from the level of oir, what comes to the level of kelim, is that which come of kelim. Over there can be exile, can be captivity. Lihi yoisam, that would be the shaveh, shviya, mamash shviya, not like we're talking now just returning, but we're talking about the idea of captivity is only kelim. Lihi yoisam b'bchinas metzias davar, because they're an entity. Kelim are an entity, mashenkim b'ha'oir, but the oil, which is connected to the moir, the light from it, mashenkim shubechinas ayin, ein shaykh golus. That's the level of ayin, of non-existent, and there's no golus. V'inyan zeh, and this idea is understood that in oil there can be golus, because oil pushes away darkness. Darkness cannot take over oil. V'inyan zeh the oil ein shaykh golus. This idea that in oil there's no golus, muvan gam bepashtus, is also understood simply. Because a little light pushes a lot from the darkness. And that is the gam la'achre yiridas hamamshochas ha'oir b'mechinas medidav agbola. When we're saying a ma'at oir, meaning that even the oir is already a little bit, meaning it's been limited, it's been restricted. Even at the time when the oir is only ma'at, it's not fully in its level of bli gvul, but it's already been limited, still it'll push away. Right? Even after the oir descends and comes down in a measured and limited way. So that's only when we can really say a little bit or a lot. Also then he pushes away the darkness. So you say the oil remains potent, it remains strong even when it comes down. So even if you have just a little bit of light, pushes away a lot of darkness. But you say to Mizu, and it's more than just pushing away. It's not that the oil has to push the. You bring in light, the darkness is pushed away by itself. So we don't need explanation to say that there is no golus for light, because the definition, the light is going to be, the oil is going to push away the darkness. So there is this characteristic that when there is light, darkness disappears. This came about in the Sheishis Yemei Bereshis after the Eibishter made a separation between Oir and Choshech. Before that, they could be together. They didn't push away one another. But now, once the Eibishter Vayabdil, once there is light, even a little light pushes away a lot of darkness. The B'tchilas Habriya, And the beginning of creation, light and darkness were serving as mixed up. After Elikim separated between the light and darkness, then it came about that darkness is pushed away. So there's light, it gets pushed away. So this explains us why Eir is no Golus, because darkness cannot overtake Eir. Gambe Pashtus, the Be'er ain't Shaykh in Agolus, that in light there is no exile. Because the darkness of Golus gets pushed away because of the light. So the Rebbe is bringing all this down to say the neshama comes from oil, and therefore the oil of the neshama cannot really go into golus. That's why it's a level of vishaveha, that is just returning, but it's not really in golus. Mash'en came the guf and nefesh habahamis that seen b'mishpat yipada. Let's look inside. Similarly, it's also, like we're saying, by Eir v'Keli, it's also by the neshama and the guf. The neshama is the light, the guf is the keli. Shem dugmas Eir v'Keli, which are similar to Eir and a keli. As the saying, known saying of my father-in-law, the Rebbe, Sharak haguf hu begolus v'la neshama. Only the guf is in exile, the soul is not in exile. V'hainu, and what he's saying is not the neshama the way it's above is not, or the neshama in the body is not in exile. Even though the neshama is dressed up in the guf, and v'haguf hu begolus, and the guf is in exile, and the neshama is dressed in the guf still. As it pertains to the soul, this is not golus. It's not golus for the neshama. What happens here? It moves it out of place. It's not in its right place. Because the guf is in exile and the neshama is dressed up in the guf. The soul, which is dressed up in the body, it finds itself not in the place. We need to return it. This also fits with the saying of our sages of blessed memory. Ani yishena. It says v'libi or. So the sages teach the pasuk. Ani yishena begalusa. I'm asleep when in golus, but still v'libi or. My heart is awake. Even at the time when I'm asleep in exile, haneshama v'libi. The neshama, that's libi, that's my heart. The neshama here is awake. Since the neshama is a part of Hashem above mamish, the neshama, Tanya says, is a chelik elokam imal. Even when it's mamish. Mamish means when it's in the guf and it's descended to a level that it is in the level of mamish, it's still a chelik elokah, which means it doesn't go into golus. It always stays intact, as the Rebbe teaches now. The gam shehi be'ofen the mamish, even when it's away like mamish meloshin mamoshes. Mamish from the loshin, not mamish actually, but also mamish would be actual, but also mamish that you can feel it. It's substance. It's the neshama is a mamish. That means that it's dressed in a body, physical body. That's the level of the neshama we're talking about. When it is mamish, when it's in the guf, it's still a chelik elokah. It's still a part of elokah from above. It is actually a part of godliness, also in the mamish and the level of a chelik elokah mamish, while it is mamish in the guf. And since the neshama, even as it's dressed up, is part of a lakia kam mamish while it's in the goof. So if you grab hold of that neshama, you get hold the whole thing. So you're getting hold of the whole elikus. You do maimer Baal Shem Tov. It's known the saying of the Baal Shem Tov. Sheksha'ato toifes b'miktzas mino etzem, ato toifes b'kuloi. That when you grab a hold part of the essence, you're actually you're grabbing hold of all of it. Lochein, and therefore, gam la'achare yiridos v'yislapshus beguf b'koyach hamafli lasis, even after the neshama descended and dressed up in the body, how does this level of godliness come down into a body that is b'koyach hamafli lasis, the power that does wonders? The Eibishter can connect these things. So even after Mafli Lasis brings it down, the neshama doesn't lose its status. It's not in Golus, like the Friedrich Rebbe is quoted before. The neshama is not in Golus. So based on this, we can say the haloshem v'shoveho, that the loshen, those who return, koyi loy rak al sug meyuchad shabi Yisrael. So therefore, we're not talking about a special category of Yidden who are in the level who don't go to Golus. Rebbe was asking before, who's this category? But this is not a category. This is every Yid from the perspective of his neshama. We're not talking about only about a special category. We're talking about each and everyone's neshama. ושבי means the soul. Since the neshama is not in exile, ein shayich bo haloshen pedia, then it doesn't fit the language of redeeming. It's not seeing the mishpat tefda. You don't have to redeem it because it's not in golus. It's not in its place, but it's not in golus. It still requires returning it. You got to return it to the kimikivon shan neshama mislabeshes bahaguf. Since it is dressed up in the body, va'ad shehi mispa'eles mimu'orei haguf, to the extent that it also becomes impacted by what happens to the body, through the exile of the body. The body being in exile impacts the soul. So the neshama is in the place of golus. And that's why the soul needs to this return, because it's not in captivity, but it's not in golus, but it needs to be returned back into its place.